Spent 16 years in retail around commerce, both brick and mortar, as well as e-commerce, which we now affectionately refer to as just commerce. About 9 years of that in the E part of the commerce, where I've had the opportunity to do everything from development all the way through leading an e-commerce organization for a small retailer out of the South with about 90 stores. Learned lots of things like how important sales and marketing are and how incredibly not fun dealing with call centers and distribution can be, but a good experience nonetheless. And then I went to Rackspace, consulting for a number of years, and last couple of years have been at Rackspace, where I'm fortunate to be part of a team with about 100 other rackers that we specifically focus only on digital commerce and content, so applications like Magento, for example. I get to work with great brands every day. I have one of the most awesome jobs out there, right? We were on a webinar this afternoon, actually, around noon, with Barney's internet retailer, Forrester, and we were talking about kind of Barney's journey in leaving a major SaaS provider and going to a different on-premise provider to kind of get rid of some of the limitations that they've had. So really interesting stories there. One thing that I took away today that I kind of want to share with you is this notion of it is no longer just about a website, right? A few years ago, we got really creative, right? We did mobile. And then we got more creative. We did responsive. We tackled 2 things, 3 things, arguably with tablets. But today's consumer is much more sophisticated than that. They demand a consistent experience through all the touchpoint devices, from cars to sensors. Obviously, that continues to mean mobile and desktop and other applications. We're going to talk today about some of those touchpoints, some of where this is headed, and as we go along here, I'll ask you to kind of think about where you're at, what devices you're using, and then start connecting that to commerce. Think about your customers and where they're headed. So I love technology. Everything from BlackBerries. Any old school BlackBerry users in here? Yeah, showing your age. I love it. Thank you. iPhone, Surface Pro 3. I think that's in my closet now, but I still love it. Recently, this Mac, which I got to do fancy presentations. That was my excuse anyway. Kindle Fires, Android. Pretty much a geek when it comes to technology, as hopefully a few of you are in here are. And I'm in a never-ending process of converting my home to kind of this notion of the smart house, right? Using sensors to drive automation across outside, inside, garage, everything. I like to know when my garage door is open, when my kids are upstairs, not because I'm a stalky, weird kind of guy, but because where I'm raised, you turn off lights when you leave a room, right? And that just irritates me. My kids leave a room, don't turn off the lights. Anybody in here raised like that, right? My wife likes to point out that we have LED lights now, and they cost about 50 cents a year. Still kind of a pet peeve of mine. I've graduated, though. That's the good news. Now, I've got it to where when the kids leave the playroom, after 30 minutes, the TV turns off, right? Saving much more power. Now, by the way, 80 to like 300 watts of power, so kind of fun. My wife hates that one too, because she has to call me in the middle of the day when it messes up. We're getting there. We're going to take a look at a few of my toys today, and as we go along, again, kind of think about how what this means to you, some of the devices you're using, and what it means to some of your consumers. And let's start thinking about some major brands right now that we'll talk about that are doing a good job of using this Internet of Things to actually do real-world commerce. It's no longer about spamming your customer, right? I think we've all graduated beyond that, but it's about sending them specific targeted interactions, things that you know about them that would improve something in their life. So my automation journey started like probably a few of yours did, where my daughter would go to sleep and we're stalking on their webcam. I said it wasn't a stalker, right? But you have a little one, you understand. And I would have to get my ass out of bed at like 9:30, 10, and go turn her lamp off, right? First world problems. So that was my first excuse to my wife to be able to purchase automation devices. I bought the Samsung Smart Hub, where I was able to control that, and then I was able to put a safety in place in case I forgot. Now the lights can go off at 10 p.m. just in case I forget to turn her lamp off right after she goes to sleep. As we talked about, that has graduated from there to garage doors, to thermostats, to spraying some deer with water, as we'll discuss in a minute. So anybody here heard of the Nest? Right, big acquisition by Google, pretty cool device. I'm always curious on this one. Who's heard of the Ecobee? Yes. Ecobee greater than Nest is all I got to say. I had a problem in my old house where I'm from Texas, and it gets extremely hot. Even like at night in the summer, it's really hot. And in the winter, it can be just the opposite because we don't really do great things with heating. And we would go to bed, and the bottom floor would be icy cold. The top floor would be burning up. And so my original foray that I told my wife to get the Ecobee 3 was I wanted to be able to use the sensors just upstairs to control the air condition control, right? So set at 73 degrees for the bedrooms only at night. It's pretty cool. Now this Ecobee now, my local utility provider in San Antonio, CPS Energy, is actually giving me $150 recently to be able to control it a few times a month. Now some of my colleagues are like, hell no, no utility company is controlling my thermostat. But when you look at the cost of like the electric grid system and the cost of replacing, if you look at some of that information that's out there, it's extremely expensive, and at the end of the day, will affect us all. So devices like the Ecobee and allowing them, for example, to pre-cool a home at 334 before I get home, as opposed to when everybody gets home and they're cooling their house, have profound impacts on me and in general across the utility grid. But it goes a little beyond just me, right? Just your usage. If it stopped at you, you probably wouldn't work so hard to connect it and make it smart. You would just have motion sensors like we used to do back in the day, and things would turn on and off. It's about collecting and aggregating all this data. So I, just like everybody in here, whether we love it or not, has given permission to Ecobee to collect my data and be able to use it with all their other customer data, where they're able to do things like show me how efficient I am with my energy usage. And customers, other neighbors next to me, and how energy efficient they are with their usage. Another really cool one, so I had this challenge. Anybody here water their grass and like within 15 minutes the water's just running down the street, right? A little aggravating. So I thought it's a great excuse to buy another device. This time I could save money with it, I told my wife. And so I bought the Ratio smart sprinkler system. It's pretty cool because it's able to track water usage and help save a few bucks. It's interesting because unlike the old sprinkler systems, you're able to input like soil and the amount of sun exposure your yard's going to get, the nozzles you have, the grade of your yard, all these inputs, and obviously connect it with sensors. The cool thing is it actually proactively goes out to the weather forecast and is able, for example, to hold the watering for that morning if they think it's going to rain today or tomorrow, or dial it back by a percentage. In addition to, if you have, for example, rough soil and a steep grade, maybe you want to water it 3-4 times, for 5 or 10 minutes so you penetrate better versus going all the way down the street with it. And this is one reason I kind of went this way. I have a problem with deer in my yard. If you're from San Antonio or the South, anywhere near there, pretty much anywhere in Texas, right, Travis? Austin, same problem? We have a deer problem. And in the communities, we're not allowed to shoot them, so it kind of changes the game a little bit. And so the best I could come up with, actually it's not the best, but the funnest idea I could come up with is to put a motion sensor in the yard, and Zone 7 sprays the hell out of those deer when they enter the yard now. So far, they're not big fans, so it's working, and thus my $200-300 here is well justified, I'm sure. Again, it's about the aggregate data, though. Ratio now knows how much water I use, how much water everybody in my community uses. This is where I think we start to we could look at other examples and some of the previous examples, but what the hell is a sprinkler system going to have to do with e-commerce? But using this data now, if you were to go to Ratio and say, hey, I'd like to understand that data, I'd like to understand more about the water and your customers and all these things, and Ecobee, same thing. Ratio could easily start sharing that data with you, and you could, for example, create and justify a business plan to create sensors that when you embed into the ground, for example, aren't guessing anymore. They know exactly how much moisture is being laid down. Or you can look at a whole community of users, like in the desert here or San Antonio, for example, where we need alternative water systems because the $300 water bills kind of stink, and this would allow the community to come together and put alternative water plans in place. So pretty cool things that we can start to get. We're at the very infancy of these types of devices. When I think about ubiquitous computing, I love to talk about the DJI Phantom. I've got a few small ones, and they end up in trees and neighbors' yards. The DJI Phantom is significantly more reliable. What's cool about this, though, is it has 10 different sensors. right? Gyroscopes, accelerometers, 4K video. But I started thinking about, it's cool that it has all these sensors. We've had these sensors. Like, if you've had a mobile device since like 2004 at least, you probably have had GPS with you. And yet these types of things are just now coming out. And that's because at the heart of innovation here is software, right? You're talking about software that can now deliver booze to you over the air as soon as the FAA opens it up, and other toys. So it isn't just about the infrastructure or the hardware. It really is the people, the processes, the software in this case. It's going to have profound impacts and ramifications on business. It's reshaping every company, if you look across the spectrum, into software companies, if you will. Now, they're not full-blown software companies, but really, if you're trying to innovate this day and age, you're not innovating with a fancy new GPS sensor. You're innovating with what you can do with that sensor and with what your customers are able to or allowing you to see in their journeys, in their lives. And it's happening everywhere, right? Not just retail, but energy, healthcare, transportation, consumer goods. So I was at, I think, the last conference, and I heard this really interesting story. This guy said, hey, there's a Tesla. Anyways, we were talking about technology. Surprise, right? I said, every morning I go to this garage and this Tesla is running. Now, Teslas don't run per se, but they certainly do climate control. Cool thing about a Tesla, again, software-based, it starts to learn the expectations of whoever's driving the car. So it knows your pattern. If you leave every day at 7:45, the Tesla will start cooling or heating the car at 7:30 to make sure that when you get in, it's ready to go. One day, this guy walks out to the garage, gets in his car, he's about to go to work, and then he realizes the Tesla wasn't running, and he couldn't figure out why. It was humorous to me because the guy, he said, then I realized it was Thanksgiving Day. The Tesla knew it was Thanksgiving Day. I forgot it was Thanksgiving Day. And if you look at, autonomous driving, right, that's a huge topic right now. Tesla's really driving it. Google has now driven, the Google fleet, I should say, has driven and logged over 700,000 miles driverless now. And the drives are under extremely limited supervision. Cars like the Teslas now are aware of, when you're driving to a Starbucks, right? They can self-navigate you there now mostly. And you can absolutely bet that they know when you drive past it and don't make a stop. So this is a Mercedes-Benz 2015 C-Class, has 13 connected sensors. Cool thing about this is that even relatively normal cars are starting to have car-to-X communication now. So it's no longer just about Waze or Google Maps, but you're now having connectivity between the car. In my case, mine's able to actually go through my phone to get to the internet. But now cars are starting to interactively communicate with one another, right? Intelligent radar systems that are able to collectively work together to tell you the traffic that you just passed is at a standstill. One thing I'm especially thankful for is active brake assist. So if you've ever been to San Antonio, what am I talking about? People from LA all day long. There's this point at 1604 with 35 where they come together, and the traffic just absolutely came to a stop a few weeks ago. Now, I had it, right, like any good driver, braking pretty aggressively, coming to a complete stop. Arguably, I stopped with about this much room. I think we were pretty good. I would have stopped a lot closer, though, had it not been for my car taking over the freaking brake pedal and absolutely bringing us to a halt. Normally, brush it off. In this case, I'm actually incredibly thankful because it was me and 3 other guys headed to a gun range. That's what we do in Texas. And we had 3 AR-15s and 4 pistols and several thousand rounds of ammo. So I'm pretty thankful we didn't get in the wreck that day, right? Some of these sensors do come in handy. Unfortunately, about 3 weeks later, I was rear-ended, so that didn't help. So let's bring it into the living room a little bit. Xbox Connect. I'm not a huge gamer, but I do have an Xbox. Anybody else Xboxes in here? Yep. Anybody have the sensor that comes with it? Yeah, pretty cool. Really freaking spooky, but cool. Old tech, but they're using it in new ways. Microsoft is really doing a good job of starting to integrate that now into our households. So now when you walk into a room, it's not able only to identify how many occupants are there, but it knows your height. I believe it is now starting to be able to determine who is actually looking at it. And so you can do things like when you get the family together, and you were together this time last week, like let's say it's a Tuesday. I don't know who watches movies on Tuesdays, but I thought it would be more relevant. And this day last Tuesday, these 4 family members were here on this couch, and you ordered pizza, and you watched a show. Wouldn't it be nice if some of our tech started suggesting things like this? Great opportunities for us to interact with consumers in meaningful ways, right? It isn't throwing them an email going, hey, here's the newest releases. It's saying, we recognize that you like to do these things every Tuesday with these 4 people in your life, and you like to order pizza. And devices today can do this, like, for example, Amazon Echo, order me a pizza. Talked about CPS Energy a while ago. Here's another really great example, and we're, I think, about halfway there right now. Thanks to CPS Energy, we know when the grid's about to have a brownout or blackout, right? That's the point. They give me money to put devices in like this so they can control those rolling brownouts and blackouts that are catastrophic. I think where we're headed with this is the thermostat already does know, or very soon could know, from CPS Energy that we're about to have this brownout or blackout. It'd be nice if it sent a message to the Amazon Echo. Again, all the devices, the sensors, and the software need some work, but the sensors are definitely in place already. And since a rolling blackout is here, or a brownout is coming, you could have Amazon drop you, or any other merchant, hopefully, in here, drop you some batteries or some candles within the hour. So let's wrap all this up. What is driving this ubiquitous world? Mobile means more than phones, right? It's not just having a phone only anymore. It's not picking up and flipping it, although I kind of missed that motion. It's about increased bandwidth, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, devices that can connect to each other in new and exciting ways, new interfaces. This is my first BlackBerry, the 7520. As old as it was, it had a color screen and 32 megs of ROM because Java. Anybody in here? Yeah, lots of RAM there. Cool thing is, even though it didn't have Wi-Fi and camera, it did have GPS, and this is a really old device. We took advantage of this for fleets, so we were actually able to do some routing. If you look at today's devices, they're significantly more powerful, right? The Apple Watch now is twice as powerful as the Apple iPhone 4 a few years ago. And all of these devices, from the very top end, all the way through even the basic entry-level devices now, have the sensors. They all have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, accelerometers. The question is, how are you taking advantage of this? Or is your website taking advantage of location-based, for example? Are you able to ask the consumer permission for their location? This wouldn't be possible without low-cost processing. It means that apps can run faster. We can now turn around information in real time, things that used to be very batch-oriented. Raspberry Pi Zero, $5 this thing runs. Gigahertz processor, half a gig of RAM. Comes in quad core, all kind of things. Processing is extremely cheap. In public cloud, it's extremely cheap. And we have these sensors laying around the house now that are $5, $10, $15. Sensors, one of my favorite topics for sure. Sensors means new kinds of alerts and interactions, right? If it's the rain sensor or being able to interact with the internet and weather forecast stations to tell you what's coming, obviously GPS and other sensors. It's able to, drive up to your house and have the garage door open automatically. Some of these examples in commerce today, a few years ago, Amazon actually introduced the Amazon Dash. There are now hundreds of Amazon Dashes, which can order things from detergent to coffee to whatever, right? Basically a free device after your first purchase. You just click the button. You have 30 minutes to cancel your order. Doing a really good job of taking something that's relatively geeky, right? Like, who has a sensor? Everybody can have these sensors. They're free to order. Very cool also, a company here called MageButton is actually enabling this to work with Magento-based platforms now. So everybody can start to take advantage of these types of communications, these types of sensors in people's homes. Facebook Deepface, very interesting. Facebook Deepface, did you know, is actually almost, 3/10, as accurate now as you or I at identifying another human being. Interesting story. A couple months ago, we're in a meeting and we're doing some diagramming because that's kind of what we do at Rackspace. And we kind of finished. We're probably about to break. I stand up to take a picture of the board, right? I want to capture the moment. 2 minutes later, before we even get to the buffet, Facebook pops up and asks me if I want to send this to Teresa. Teresa is my colleague there in the bottom left. Kind of freaked us both out, right? But very interesting. Does that happen to anybody else right now? Facebook just kind of randomly pops up and does a phenomenal job of recognizing who's in your photos. Yeah, watch out for those public profile settings. So I like to use these examples because we can all relate to them, right? We understand what these sensors are. We know what light motion sensors are, things like that. But it isn't just for consumers. It's emerging in every industry, in every country around the world now. They're very inexpensive. You're seeing them propagate way out of the incubation period and into the mainstream, as Amazon's kind of pushing on right now, as MageButton's doing right now. And according to Gartner, by the end of last year, so concluding 2015, there were over 4.9 billion connected things already sending data, massive amounts of data back. And they predict that by 2020, there will be over 25 billion connected things. Now, that's kind of hard to relate to, but if you look at something that Frost and Sullivan recently came up with, along with this big push of connected devices, about 40% of all the data generated by 2020 is going to be from these connected sensors. It's going to require cloud, big data, massive amounts of storage. It's really changing the way and the way we interact with commerce, the things we care about. It's no longer just about websites, mobile, desktop, tablet. Now, we've got to contend with this. Our consumers are starting to ask for these types of experiences. Touch, voice. Does anybody here have a toddler, a baby, or niece, nephew, who walks up to a magazine and is just like, what? It's not doing anything? Anybody tell me if you experienced this. Wow. Right? This is exactly where we're headed. These types of new prevalent interfaces, Kindles that aren't just static anymore, even already ahead of the curve there, but really wanting to interact with these stories, interacting with this experience. Wearables are a great example of this. Apple iPhone, watch, I don't think you want to put an iPhone on your wrist yet. Fitbits, right, which I don't wear because it's a little embarrassing for me when I look at it every day. Here's a quick clip from one of our customers, Under Armour. They're really thinking about innovating, using some of these sensors as the costs come down to kind of change the way we go about our activities and the way we wear our clothes. So I think late 90s, not a huge gamer, but I found myself around these places because back then I did computer work. And we strapped this like VGA screen, 640 by 480, huge dots. You don't want to it's like looking at this right here and trying to figure out what's going on. We strapped it to our head and we'd play, Quake or whatever it was, Doom. It must have been Quake. Doom was really old back in the day. And you get extremely nauseated, right? Very uncomfortable. I'm glad to say that we've come a long way now, Oculus Rift and some others. Extremely excited about where this is headed, particularly because I'm sort of a managed services company and all this data has to go somewhere, so it gets me a little excited. Let's think about what this might mean. Does anybody here have, there's one app called Teladoc. Does anybody have are able to do a doctor's visit on your phone? Anybody use that? Yeah, fantastic, right? We're big fans if my daughter got sick and my son is now about the same kind of sick, we pretty much bet that he caught it and dial in a prescription by talking to the doctor and have them talk to the kid. It's really, really great. I think if we continue this pattern, again, that's a real world technology, but it's been out for a few years. I think the next evolution of this are probably something like this, right? I could see an Oculus Rift, maybe even a mobile device. Have you seen the little Pico projectors that push the video up against the wall? being able to call into a call center of plumbers, right? Certified plumbers. And it's not an emergency. You want to fix your sink. They help you take a look at it. They help you diagnose it. They're able to instantly ship you that part. And then you call them back up when it arrives an hour or two later, maybe 24 hours. And you resume and you fix your own plumbing. I think this is the direction that we're headed largely, right? You're still going to have plumbers, right? B2B especially needs, quick reactions. You're also going to have emergency situations, but you're going to have situations like this where the cost of some of these services is going to come down. I think some of these internet-connected things, some of these sensors and devices are going to really pave the path for us there. So this all really wouldn't be possible without cloud. Cloud is facilitating rapid growth of apps and data. We've got customers now storing petabytes of data that wouldn't have been possible 5 years ago, really. Very, very costly. And applications are syncing like never before. There's 4 major implications. Let's think about what this means. So we want to head this way. We want to start using the sensors and data. What does this mean to us here in the room? How are we going to kind of harness this, and how are we going to secure it? Big data, security, privacy, and society are 4 big implications of this. Let's go back to our earlier example of the Tesla driving home. Driverless cars store huge amounts of data, right? Where you've been, probably predictively where you're going, the speed, other cars as it passes by. That data is making driving a lot safer, mostly. And the routes are definitely more efficient, and that's going to mean fewer cars on the road. By estimates, if 90% of the cars were self-driving, we'd save 21,000 lives a year, right? Accidents, things like that, and would eliminate about $450 billion in cost. Think about some of the ripple effects that that's going to cause. Elon Musk, he actually, in a recent article, says he foresees a day when driving may actually be illegal. Now, not driving out in Kansas, that's probably going to be okay for a while, but HOV lanes may be converted, or when you're on the interstate highways, the cars drive themselves. I would be a big fan of letting the car drive myself. But this isn't just cutting edge and coming up now. B2B, or B2C, arguably. UPS has been in this for quite a while. The UPS, they don't currently have autonomous vehicles, but back in like 2006, I believe it was, started doing a lot of integration with computer systems in the car. So while the computers are telling the driver when to turn, controlling the on-off of the vehicle, braking, things like that, they aren't actually driving the car, right? There's still a human in the chair. So since 2004, using some of this technology, UPS has already saved 10 million gallons of gas, which is equal to taking 5,000 cars off the road. Another great example, real world, Netflix. This was back in 2006, ran $1 million prize to find the best algorithm to predict when customers are going to be interested in next. Like, what show do you want to watch based on any characteristic? Efforts like this are going to be more and more important across more industries, not just video, but it's going to be already impacting consumer stores and B2B experiences today. The more data you collect, the more accurately you can predict what your customers are wanting. Security is going to have huge impacts here. It already is. I'm really excited, actually. Side note, the major cloud providers now, Azure, AWS, Rackspace is doing a pretty good job of this in many respects. It's really security first, right? When you look at a public cloud now, it almost isn't optional to just put it out in the wild. By default, when you deploy applications, extremely secure. And that's because if you look at companies like Uber who depend on these clouds, imagine trying to use Uber when your internet connectivity fails, right? You're not going to order the Uber. If the driver's driving you and his internet connectivity fails, Uber's data center goes down, something like this, what happens to that path? There's big considerations for advanced security and self-healing systems. All right. So if we reduce cars by 99%, let's go back to this example. This is a blogger that put an article out, very interesting. It's going to disrupt the job market in many ways. That blogger predicted we'd have about 10 million jobs lost, actually. I'd say probably made up in other ways, but So it's certainly going to have a domino effect. What happens when cars are self-driving, 99% of them? What happens to the insurance industry, right? Do you need insurance anymore at all? Does it cost a few bucks now? Who pays for your insurance? Is it the car manufacturer now instead of you? I mean, you're not driving. Whose liability is it? If that trickles down to auto finance, who needs to finance a car, right? If cars are getting you to your destination more efficiently, and let's just make up a number here, 1/10 the cost they do today, because there's no person driving it, then are people buying cars anymore? And this goes on to parking. I mean, I think it'd be really spooky, right, to go like to a major football game, baseball, basketball. I don't want to offend anybody here. Soccer, you hit a few. Imagine going there to this game and the parking lot's empty. Like, what happens to these parking lots? What do we make out of them? Hopefully parks or something. But what does that mean to parking and to fees, and how do we make up for that? And if we go through a few of these, aftermarket financing, obviously used cars become a challenge because nobody's buying the cars. Rental car companies, I mean, unless you're in Kansas or rural parts of Texas, you may not need to rent a car anymore. Public transportation, and the very interesting one. Like, think about this: if cars are really very efficient, and your 1 hour road jam when you used to take a train and it would take you like 35 minutes roughly, if that's down now to a very efficient 25-minute drive at the cost of the train or around there, would you take the train anymore? What happens to the L in Chicago or the underground transportation systems in New York? Obviously, professional drivers would have an impact, and manufacturing. Man, cars are probably going to start looking kind of weird. I mean, I'm sure we'll have windows because we humans kind of like to look out at stuff, but you don't need a steering wheel. You don't need car seats, driver seats in the front. It's really going to change a lot of things. So the State of the Cloud report came out this year, and we actually saw something that was really interesting. For the first time in the history of this report, something other than security became the #1 concern for these companies. And that is a lack of resources and expertise. There are thousands of competent technical professionals out there, but the pace we're moving at is extremely rapid. Infrastructure as a service, thanks to these major public cloud innovations like AWS, Azure, are doing a really great job of bringing that cost down and making it very prevalent. But trying to understand how to assemble these to make best use of it is increasingly challenging. A recent study conducted by Forrester cited that the lack of funds and conflicting KPIs is the top challenge in executing a digital strategy now. Kind of reminds me of the brick and mortar days, right? Like, maybe some of you are, hopefully not, but you're still experiencing this. I know certainly if you rewind, say 5 years ago even, there was this notion of the brick and mortar store retail department versus the e-commerce department, right? Anybody remember that? Or having to deal with that still? And I think this is kind of another iteration of that, right? It's having these separate disjointed units, the technology teams with the marketing and the commerce teams, start to leverage these types of opportunities and these experiences. Right now, they're very segregated. It's more incubation lab, and these have to come together. Despite the obvious benefits of some of this technology and where we're going, I think what some of our expectations are in this room from how these companies are going to start to interact and suggest things for us, only 5% of the developers today are focused on mobile and 7% on Internet of Things. The cloud is really freaking hard, right? To get all this right, you just want to write your app, you want it to be beautiful, you want to send it on its way in a marketplace, have it purchased, have your consumers use it. You don't want to deal with assembling these things. Good news is the trends are continuing, so if this is something that interests you from a development perspective, hopefully from a marketing and a customer experience perspective, there's definitely a trend for jobs that are upticking in this area to help us enable some of these types of experiences. All right, so when I talk to CIOs at conferences like this and engagements and customers coming on site, I have a few suggestions to them. They always ask me, what would you do? Like, what do you do with these things? That sounds great. It sounds wonderful. There's some really mega enterprise brands, Starbucks, right? Some others doing cool things with it, but how do I make use of it? I say, start now. It's kind of like a reset back to a few years ago, but start now, build something cool. Don't try to build it perfect. Just build something cool people want to use. It's actually useful and actually makes money, probably help out. And keep going, iterate, stay current with the latest devices and APIs. Make use of these things. See what your customers do with them. Put them in the store, let them play, and get help. If your specialty isn't infrastructure and big data and housing gigabytes and terabytes of data, then don't do it. Find somebody else to do it for you. Another interesting point here is SaaS, right? SaaS is incredibly useful in many ways. There's a lot of things like order management systems that aren't exactly sexy anymore, but you got to have them. They're part of doing business. But it's not going to innovate you, right? It's not going to bring your business forward. Maybe it is, but for most, it's just something that you kind of have to do. Order fulfillment, order shipping, logistics. Those are really good points for SaaS-based software. If you look at some of the innovations of examples like Kendra Scott, some of the things they're doing, Charlie a few years ago did a lot of innovation around color patterns, things like this. A lot of customization in those platforms. Go back to Amazon with the buttons and the 5-second checkouts, right? Could they have done that with SaaS? And if they did do it with SaaS-based platforms, wouldn't everybody else using that platform have access to it? So consider when you're looking at kind of PaaS, SaaS, what are you specializing in? What kind of experience are you trying to create? What is differentiating your brand and your business? This really has led to a bifurcation in the way Gartner has recognized kind of this internet cloud thing. There's always been the infrastructure, internet as a service. Amazon, obviously, a strong leader, Microsoft, Azure, some others. And a couple years ago, they created this new quadrant called the Managed Cloud Quadrant. And that is really great. You've got awesome infrastructure. Some of these companies that specialize in a really kick-ass in infrastructure as a service don't exactly want to provide services per se. Some, but they really don't want to be like in the nitty-gritty of non-repeatable services. And so this was born for companies that can help you do some of that. We do that for customers like Q4 Inc. One of the customers out there, we're seeing a continued trend towards multi-cloud usage. AWS, Azure, Dedicated, and VMware. One company is using all of that, connecting them with integrated systems and processes. And you have your more traditional companies as well, right? There's actually a huge breakpoint where it becomes much more economical to go private cloud than public cloud. That's worth discussing, particularly if you don't have a lot of bursting in your business, like major triple usage once, twice a year, most of you do. It's worth taking a look at that. In summary, ubiquitous computing is really exciting. I know for the geek in me for sure, but it's more exciting for me because of the types of experiences that I get to have out in the real world. Forrester is projecting that right now, the Internet of Things is having about a $1.2 trillion impact on commerce. And what's interesting today is that it wasn't just devices, Internet of Things for the sake of sensors. It was these platforms. It's connecting these sensors and creating seamless platforms and experiences. It's going to change our world in very dramatic ways, particularly with Oculus Rift and some of these experiences that we haven't had before. So start thinking now about how to best position your company, your brands, your customers' brands, to use some of these devices and take advantage of some of these experiences. Thank you.